Good evening. Welcome to the Glazov Gang. Tonight, another special episode with a very special guest. Our issue this evening, the Oslo Syndrome, Delusions of a People Under Siege. Our guest, Kenneth Levin, a psychiatrist, a historian, and the author of the book of the title of this episode, The Oslo Syndrome. Ken Levin, welcome to the Glazov Gang.
Thank you, Jamie. Glad to be with you.
I want to talk to you about the Oslo Syndrome this evening and also let it tie into what's happening today in terms of the negotiations with Iran, in terms of the quote-unquote peace process, etc. Thank you so much, Dr. Levin, for writing that book, because it also meant a lot to me and is very close to everything that I'm studying and also what the world, of course, is facing today.
Thank you.
Dr. Levin, let's begin with this. Your interest not necessarily is anti-Semitism, but Jews' responses to anti-Semitism.
Right.
Let's begin with that a little bit. Tell us about your interest.
Well, looking initially at the Oslo agreements, it was obvious that the Israelis were taking a suicidal course, putting their families and themselves in mortal danger by embracing Yasser Arafat, and in some respects the founder of modern terrorism, as a peace partner. It made no sense if you look at what Arafat was doing and what he was saying. There was no way that was going to lead to peace. And looking at that, and then looking at it in the context of Jewish history and history more broadly, it led me to look at what is a common response among elements of either minorities within nations under chronic siege or small states under chronic siege by the larger surrounding parties. And that is elements within those besieged populations will almost invariably embrace elements of the indictments, of the besiegers' indictments, no matter how biased or outrageous they are, in the hope that by embracing them and by trying to appease them, by modifying their own behavior to accede to the demands of the besiegers, they will be able to assuage the hatred against them and win relief. And this is, in a sense, what the Israelis were doing, or those who led the Oslo process. That is, they were embracing the Arab indictments, even though Arab indictments were in fact outrageous. They simply did not want a Jewish state in their midst. Embracing them, saying that somehow if only Israel would give up more land, make other concessions, make the state less Jewish, strip the state of some of its Jewish accoutrements, would be modified and peace would be had. And the same thing could be seen throughout the history of the Jewish diaspora and within other minorities as well.
Dr. Levin, so tell us let's switch over to the American Jews, the liberal Jews that support Obama, etc., trying to figure out their psychology. And this is in your book and in one of our interviews that we did for Front Page. They've tried to, as you've shown, craft a new identity for themselves as well, because they find the Jewish identity burdensome to them. So they try to carve out an identity for themselves in terms of, as you've pointed out, class affiliation and leftist self-definition. Can you paint that picture for us a little bit in terms of the psychology of leftists supporting a president that's actually against Israeli interests?
Oh, that's exactly right. If you look at the Jewish left as it evolved in Europe and then here in the States, and one could argue that there were reasons for Jews in Europe to identify more with liberal groups than with conservative groups. Of course, in general, liberal groups were more prepared, not universally by any means, but in general more prepared to extend civic rights to Jews. But beyond that, there are two dynamics that drew Jews, elements of the Jewish community, to the left. One is some were simply trying to escape a Jewish identity, and so embrace the left, particularly the extreme left, the socialists and communists, as an alternative identity. They were no longer Jews, they were socialists or communists, and just immerse themselves in this alternative identity. Others within the Jewish community thought that since Jews were always attacked, one of the standard anti-Semitic tropes were Jewish parochialism, supposedly, that they're only interested in their own communal matters, that, well, if they immerse themselves in some broader agenda, and particularly in what they saw and others saw as the agenda of the disadvantaged, then somehow that would bring them relief and they would win acceptance by, again, divorcing themselves from particularist Jewish issues. And so it became very attractive to them to immerse themselves, not even beyond beyond liberalism, to the left more broadly. And in some ways, this has happened even when liberals betrayed the Jews. They still saw themselves as in their interest to immerse themselves in this broader identity. Jews brought this idea to America with them, and it became most noted in American politics. It was operating before, but most dramatically vis-a-vis the current dynamics, political dynamics in this country, with the Roosevelt administration. That is, the Jews identified broadly with what Roosevelt hammered together or cobbled together as his great alliance of the supposedly disadvantaged. That is, those hurt by the Depression, minority groups, urban minorities, and Jews felt comfortable there. And there were some actual reasonable grounds for the identification with Roosevelt, because between the wars, and particularly after the start of the Depression, there was a considerable amount of anti-Semitism in this country, and Jews were victimized and could have a very difficult time getting into universities, getting employment, etc. And the New Deal programs that Roosevelt created were open to Jews, so they were able to get employment in a way they had not for some years. So there was that grounds that gave a logic to it, but it became more than the logical, more than self-interest. It became immersion in this old fantasy of anti-Semitism would end if we immersed ourselves in some much broader identity. And the fallacy of this and the difficulties with it were illustrated during the war, when Roosevelt went out of his way to prevent rescue of any significant Jewish population, or of any Jewish population. There were people who could easily have been rescued. There were people who, in fact, obtained American visas and were still blocked by the State Department and by the Roosevelt administration from coming to this country. And Jews were reluctant to criticize Roosevelt. They were reluctant to some degree because they feared a rise in anti-Semitism. But even one could argue that the greater reluctance was to criticize Roosevelt, identified with as the great leader of this broad movement of the disadvantaged. And it was, in fact, only when some Jews outside the mainstream leadership began to work, a small group began to work with others, with Republicans who were interested in promoting rescue, that some rescue efforts were finally undertaken, and Roosevelt was really forced into it, and again withheld government funds that should have been available for it, so that the funding came from Jewish contributors, but it was only again some who broke out of this narrow comprehension of what is Jewish interest and really looked at what was interest, that is trying to save people, or that some rescuing did occur.
Dr. Levin, thank you. And so what I want to get to here as well is how this applies to our jihad syndrome today and to the jihad denial. So what you very powerfully touch on, which I find very fascinating in how you explained it in the Oslo syndrome, is that many people within human nature and in many humans, there's this desire to feel that we're part of the script when we're in difficult situations. So, for instance, in battered woman syndrome, if the woman is being beaten by an abusive husband who will always beat her, but she begins to rationalize, well, if I just cook the meal a little bit better, or if I just do this a little bit better, maybe I can change that behavior, when in fact, you're not going to, in the end, in certain situations, change that. So in jihad, for instance, if there's Surah 929, if there's Surah 95, which says to kill the unbelievers and to wage war on the kafir, that somewhere in the West, this is too painful to accept for many people, and therefore they engage in all of this denial in terms of, let's say, Tamerlan and Johar, that maybe it was the boxing that did it, or it was the rap music, and if we're just a little bit nicer or share a piece of the pie, that maybe they won't be interested in those surahs anymore. Tell us a little bit about how, you know, many in the West engage in this desire to feel that they're part of the script in terms of stopping jihad.
Well, you're absolutely right, Jamie. And one could look at, for example, the response to 9/11. Many in America, most, I would say, were outraged and saw this as an attack on us that we must somehow respond to and go after those who want to destroy us, who were saying explicitly they wanted to destroy us. And the message of the people behind 9/11 and their supporters and their broad support in the Arab and broader Muslim world, the message was clear that they thought that Muslim Arabs in particular and other elements of the Muslim world, one could look at the Iranians obviously, were unfairly deprived of their proper place in the sun by Western imperial powers, and that they were determined to pursue a supremacist agenda, which was to conquer and convert as much of the world as possible, and ultimately they aspired to convert all the world to their brand of Islam and to Islam, period. And the mentality is comparable to, and to some degrees, to Germans in the period between the wars after World War I, when they felt that they were stabbed in the back, they were stripped of their proper place in the sun, and they wanted revenge, or they wanted to pursue a supremacist agenda. Now, many after 9/11 realized again that we were attacked and we had to respond to this. But there were also many in this country who said, the first reaction was, well, what did we do to provoke this? Mm-hmm. What did we do to cause this? And again, this is not like my focus in the Oslo Syndrome was on Jews, obviously, and on other minorities, small groups being besieged by larger parties. But here we have the the most powerful country in the world, that's suddenly facing a new danger that its population was essentially not paying attention to, or even though there were the bombing of the World Trade Center in '93 and other attacks, the coal, etc., the embassies in Africa. Basically, people weren't paying attention. Suddenly, they felt vulnerable, even though we're the most powerful country in the world. And the knee-jerk reaction, the immediate reaction was, what did we do to deserve this? What did we do to infuriate them to such a degree that they would do this terrible, they would commit this crime upon us? And how do we make amends? How do we assuage them?
Dr. Levin, we just have a couple minutes left. What's your reading of John Kerry and his, I think what I would say, moronic leadership at the moment of this quote-unquote peace process? What do you think is happening there, and with the Obama administration thinking that it's leading the way?
Well, I think it's total nonsense. Everything that they're being, firstly, one doesn't lie to allies, and clearly Kerry initially misled the Israelis, and it was apparently only the French and the British that clarified to Israel what was being offered. The Israelis obviously would prefer to see the Iranian nuclear program dismantled by means short of war, and believe that strong sanctions were working to some degree, and if they were ratcheted up even further, there was some chance of their being successful. And the Americans were leading them on in this regard. Kerry was, the Obama administration was. And suddenly they're informed that the administration was prepared to sign on to a deal which would give the Iranians some relief from sanctions for virtually nothing in return. Supposedly a freezing of their enrichment program, but they already have huge amounts of uh, uranium rich at 20%, and even 3.5% enrichment. It could quickly be ratcheted up in a very short time. There was nothing apparently to be said about dismantling the Arak uh, plutonium facility that the Iranians are building, and there's nothing to be being said about their continuing to make produce very high grade centrifuges that they then could bring online. The other
Dr.
nonsense.
Levin, we just have about a minute left, but go ahead and conclude on that.
Oh, I was just going to say the other nonsensical thing that we keep hearing from the administration is how, well, what we have to worry is the breakout piece. That is when they can have enough uranium, but that doesn't mean they're going to transform it into a bomb. But that stage can be done in first of all, they've been working on the technology for a bomb alone. It's a parallel process. It's not they waiting for to figure out how to build a bomb. They've been working on the rocketry and on the bomb and on miniaturization of the bomb. Secondly, that could be done in a very small space. It's only the enrichment facilities that are large enough to be able to identify and to respond to. So all the arguments that the administration puts forward are essentially nonsensical. Now, if you want to, do I have a moment to go on? I don't know what your time is like.
We're out of time, sir, but maybe 30 seconds.
Okay. The question, if you raise the question, well, is Obama himself suffering from the Oslo syndrome? Is he so intimidated by the Iranians? I think there's another dynamic at work here, and that is he's a true believer that he can win these people over. That he is of such stature and somewhat so superior to any former leadership we've had in this country or in the West, and is so attuned to what goes on in other parts of the world in a way other leaders have not, that he could actually win the Iranians from their determination to have a bomb and bring them into the concert of nations that he imagines as replacing American supremacy.
What a tragic situation, what a catastrophic situation we're facing, especially with this man in the White House. Dr. Levin, thank you so much for joining us and for all the work that you do.
Thank you, Jamie.
And Dr. Levin, I have to tell you, so many members of the Glazov gang are so excited now that we have a psychiatrist that's part of our gang. Are you willing to give some free therapy to some of the members of the Glazov gang, including myself?
Oh, absolutely. But I think the people that you target as the problems in this nation need the therapy much more than you guys do.
Okay, I think we just need sometimes to be given more optimism in fighting this battle against such evil. Dr. Levin, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Jamie.
Okay, thank you. And thank you for joining the Glazov gang. We'll see you next week. Good night.